One of the most common ways to resolve a tax collections case is through a payment plan. But the problem is that a lot of people just throw out the term payment plan, and that doesn't actually mean anything at the IRS, in the law, or in the IRS regulations. What a payment plan is, and a lot of people get fooled by this, is it's a gentleman's agreement between you and the IRS that you'll pay the penalty and the interest that's accruing every month in exchange for them not levying you. Now, the problem with that is you're not actually making a dent in the balance, even though you might think that you are, and the IRS has 10 years to collect from you. The other problem is it's not binding on the IRS. Unless you've signed it and the IRS has signed it, which we'll see when we talk about installment agreements, they can break the payment plan anytime they want to and freeze their bank account or lien your house. So if you have a debt of approximately, say, $500,000, you're generally going to be running about $20,000 a year in interest and penalties. That would lead to a payment plan for you of about $1,800 a month. And you'd probably be really happy thinking you got an $1,800 a month payment plan on $500,000. The problem is it's not real because you didn't sign it and the IRS didn't sign it. It's simply a payment plan. It's simply keeping the IRS away until they decide they're too close to their 10-year limit to keep letting you pay that little per month, and then they will show back up. An installment agreement is a formal arrangement between you and the Internal Revenue Service. It's signed by you and it's signed by them. It's negotiated between you and them within a very specific set of parameters. They look at your income, they look at the allowable expenses in your zip code, and then they take 2/3 of your monthly cash flow. The problem is that if your expenses, for example, housing, are higher than the norms in your zip code, the IRS will ask you to cut it. That's where an advocate or an attorney can come in. For example, in my zip code, Metairie 70002, you can have $3,200 a month for housing. If you have a $6,000 mortgage, you're going to have to argue and convince an IRS agent to quote unquote let you spend an extra $2,800 a month on the mortgage. This is a math problem. You take all of your expenses, you take your income, you subtract your expenses from your income, and 2/3 of that will be your payment plan. Now, the vast majority of my cases that don't resolve with offers in compromise resolve with what are called PPIAs, or partial pay installment agreements. What a PPIA is an installment agreement where both the IRS and the taxpayer know that the full balance of the taxes will not be paid during the payment plan. The taxpayer will make payments once a month for 6 years, and if they do that and stay in compliance with all other tax laws, at the end of 6 years, the balance will be forgiven. Now note, the IRS does not care what your balance is when it negotiates a payment plan with you. That's very important to understand. The IRS is not a bank. You could have a principal balance in the millions of dollars and end up paying hundreds of dollars a month if that's what the math tells us is your payment plan. I recently had a case where a gentleman owed around $1.2 million and his payment plan was $609 per month. Both the IRS signed it and we signed it, putting him in a permanent installment agreement for 6 years at that amount. It's all about how much you earn versus how much you spend versus what is allowed for you to spend. Payment plans, installment agreements, and PPIAs are not negotiated. They're math problems. You take your income, you take your expenses, you negotiate the allowable expenses as high as you can, and you arrive at your payment plan. Now, the IRS has certain programs called monitored installment agreements for taxpayers with variable income. For example, a very common type of income here is personal injury attorneys. They might get a big settlement once every 3 years, so the IRS might require them to pay over 10 or 15% of that settlement whenever it is made, but not require a periodic monthly payment. So the IRS and the taxpayer have a tremendous amount of flexibility to craft these installment agreements. The key thing to understand, though, is what type you are in. Are you in a payment plan where nobody signed anything and it's not actually a settlement? Are you in an installment agreement where both you and the IRS sign the paperwork and you'll pay every dime of all the taxes, penalties, and interest? Or are you in a partial pay installment agreement that lasts for 6 years, and if you make all the payments, you'll have some tax forgiven at the end?